Minister. The next item is questions to the Minister for Housing and Local Government.
John Clary, will the Minister make a statement on the work of the Town and Country Planning Intensive Agriculture Working Group?
Thank you, Russell George. The group is examining how local planning authorities can plan for new agricultural development like poultry sheds. It will advise on issues to be considered by development plan policies and the material considerations involved in determining the planning applications. Work has been delayed by the pandemic response, but will be recommencing shortly.
What assurances can you give me with timescales on when we will see the necessary guidance in place?
Yeah, so, Russell, I share your concern, and we are working. It's really disappointing that the group, which was due to hold its fourth meeting in March, just before the lockdown, was not then able to go ahead. They are now going ahead. So obviously, we want them to do their work as fast as possible. We want to get all the right information in place. At the moment, where planning permission is required for new poultry sheds, they do have to consider the economic benefits and the environmental impacts of the proposal, including the cumulative effects of the increasing number of developments. So some of the things you mentioned are already in place, but I am absolutely aware that we need to look again at the issues around pollution of the watercourses and so on. I'll be working with my colleague Leslie Griffiths on getting the balance right between farm diversification policies and environmental protection, which is the two competing aspects here. So that's exactly what the group is looking at, with a view to then us reviewing planning policy in the light of their findings. And I assure you, we have encouraged them to go as fast as possible.
We now turn to questions from party spokespeople. Plaid Cymru spokesperson Telith Jewell.
Minister, we are likely to see long-lasting changes to the housing market following COVID-19, not necessarily always for the better. People who can afford it may now want to buy large houses with open space and gardens, and one that doesn't have to be as close to the office, and that could cause many people to be priced out of their communities. In our rural communities, that's likely to be experienced most. Yet we still don't have an action plan to stop the scandal of second home owners exploiting loopholes to avoid paying extra council tax. And we still don't have a planning system that's capable of restricting second home ownership, holiday homes or Airbnb properties. Can I ask you, Minister, when we're going to see action to reform the planning system and give local authorities teeth to ensure the post-COVID housing market works for young people and our rural communities?
Thank you, Dallas. I share your concern about pricing local people out of the market, and it's not just in rural communities, that's actually in communities across Wales, as Wales becomes a very nice place to come and live. But there are three separate issues there that your question raises, it seems to me. The first is actually people who want to come and live and work in Wales, but who can afford better houses because they're perhaps relocating from a more expensive part of the United Kingdom. But those people are coming to Wales to live and become part of our community. So they're not second homeowners. They're people, coming here to become part of our communities. But nevertheless, I think it's right to say that there's some evidence at the moment, anecdotal, that they're pushing prices up. And we certainly are aware of that, and we are looking at that. The second one is the issue about people buying a second home that they themselves want to use. And you'll be aware that during the pandemic response, we reviewed the threshold for grant assisting people. So we are now looking to see whether we can review the threshold for swapping from community tax to business rates. So we're actively looking at that at the moment. We'll be getting information back in from our local authorities about how many people were affected by the change and whether that has any material effect on the numbers of people who are making the flip. That's not going to change the way that they use their homes, but it does change the amount of tax that they pay and so on. So we're looking at that. And I know that the First Minister had a meeting with your colleague and mine, Sian Gwenllian, earlier today, in which they had quite a robust discussion, I believe, and I know that discussion centred on a number of things that can be done to allow local people to access affordable housing in their communities. Yesterday, during my statement, I offered clear a meeting, and I'm more than happy to take that forward. So I know the First Minister met with Sian Gwenllian this morning. So I'm suggesting that we get a small group of us together who have similar concerns. And as I said yesterday in the statement, we're not the repository of all the good ideas, so we're very happy to explore it.
I really welcome that. Thank you, Minister. And I'm sure that we will certainly be very keen to work with you and to see what solutions can be found. So thank you for your answer on that. Now, to turn to some remarks that you made a while back, I think it was shortly after you came to the portfolio, you'd referred to new estates that have come through the planning system as potentially creating slums for the future. Now, at the time, I know that we as a party had agreed with you and that there are several examples of how this issue is still a problem. Just down the road from where you are now in the Senedd, flats can't be sold by their owners because of a refusal by the people who have built the buildings to fix issues with them. The fraud of leasehold homes that only now is being investigated by the Competition and Markets Authority, and the never-ending business sites across Wales, such as that in Coetsy, in Bridgend, where the developer keeps getting permission to build more homes because the authority, as I understand it, is powerless to use their previous poor performance as a reason to refuse future permission. Now, it would be one thing if the system were capable of delivering affordable homes, but the planning system ensures that if an authority gets too big for its boots, the inspector can cut the amount of affordable homes to ensure the guaranteed profits the large developers keep coming, and profits that we believe in Plaid Cymru should be subject to a windfall tax. So I'd ask, Minister, when the government is going to clip the wings of the planning inspector and tell the planning inspector directly that it is the Welsh Government's policy to increase affordable homes, as I know that you do want to do, and that they should not be rebuking local authorities who try to ensure development is in the interests of the community and not the shareholders of the developers.
Thank you, Giles. Again, you've ranged over a couple of issues there in your questions and comments. So on the first one of leasehold, we've had the Law Commission's report now, and there are a number of things there that the UK government needs to do, but there are some things that we can do. You'll be aware that we've already moved to stop leasehold sales in anything that the Welsh Government has supported with subsidy, so in the Help to Buy schemes, for example, and that's been very effective in doing that. And we are looking at ways of assisting leaseholders with changes to the rules and so on around how you acquire the freehold. But we are working in conjunction with the UK Government over the Law Commission's really comprehensive report, which is being worked through. It hasn't been out that long. So I share your concern about the sale of leasehold properties. Actually, one of the other issues, and my colleague Ken Skates has had a working group looking into this, is not just where houses are sold as leasehold, but where people buy a freehold house, but then they discover that the management of their estate is part of a company, because actually the roads haven't been adopted. So one of the things we are looking at is an adoptable standard for roads right across Wales. It varies from authority to authority at the moment, and actually increasing the arm of local authorities in being able to negotiate that those roads and actually sewage and water and all the rest of it are brought up to standard and adopted as part of the 106 procedure. So then turning to the issue around affordable homes and what can be negotiated as part of that 106 procedure, I don't quite share your analysis of where the planning inspectorate is, but we are very concerned that the local authorities put into a strong position in terms of negotiating what contribution is necessary from the developer, both in terms of affordable homes and actually in terms of necessary infrastructure to support the housing development, because we also don't want to see housing developments isolated away from facilities with no active travel, no green infrastructure and so on. So there are a number of things in Planning Policy Wales that are advancing that. Shortly I will be bringing forward the National Development Framework for Wales next week, I think it is, into the Senedd. And you'll be aware that as part of the Local Government and Elections Bill, we're proposing regional arrangements to bring the strategic regional arrangements in place. And all of those things will assist the local authorities in negotiating higher affordable housing targets. And the last thing I want to mention is you'll know that we're also insisting that on Welsh Government land, and I'm working with other public landowners to extend this, there was 50% of affordable housing on all Welsh Government land that goes to housing now.
Yes, thank you. And I know that some of this was ground that we covered yesterday, but I do welcome a lot of what you're saying. Now, as we've just seen from that exchange already, there's a lot that I think that our two parties do agree on. We agree that more affordable homes are needed throughout Wales. We agree that more social housing is needed and that new estates should be supported by properly funded infrastructure, as you were just referring to. And we agree that they should be as estates built around the principles of active travel and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, that they shouldn't be promoting car usage or require major changes to road networks. But my office has seen correspondence from one planning department that ignores the remarks you made a year ago in this chamber that the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act should take precedence over LDPs produced prior to that act. Our planning system in this regard, I'm afraid, just isn't fit for purpose. Isn't it time for the Welsh Government to take action and require planning departments to stop allowing developments devised under the old system to continue, and to ensure instead that any housing estates must be redesigned within the principles of the Welsh Government policy, regardless of when that land was first allocated for housing?
So I'd be really grateful if you'd share the correspondence with me so that I can see which authority we're talking about, because it may be that we can have an individual conversation with that authority. The problem with the planning system, a plan-led system, which I absolutely believe in, because without that you cannot have a local voice in what what's allowed to be built in their local community. And I really do think that people should be allowed to have the community that they want locally. But the problem with the planning system, it has a lag in it, because when you get planning consent, you have permission to build whatever it is you got consented, for a long period of time before it expires. And actually, it's not possible or highly problematic to retrofit those consents, and that's a matter of some, frustration to all of us. So we still have new houses going up in Wales that don't have sprinklers in them because the particular development was started before that legislation. So in each of the improvements we've made more recently, we've tried very hard to make sure that when the new regulation or requirement on planning comes in, it comes in almost immediately that the legislation is passed. But it is not possible to make it go backwards. So if you've got consent, you've got consent. And that's one of the frustrations, because we do have things still being built to old spec, which would not now get planning consent. So I share your frustration. What we've been trying to do there, though, is have a conversation with those house builders about not doing that, because they don't have to do that. They can, apply to change the planning consent, and we've been offering assistance with doing that. And actually, I'm pleased to say that I met with one of the very biggest house builders most recently, and they've changed their attitude completely and have been talking to me about how they might do that on some of their developments. So it does show that if you show the way, then people will come along that path with you, because they can see that it's worth doing. So there are some rays of light, but I share your frustration with the lag that the planning system necessarily sets up.
Question 3, David Melding.
What assessment has the Minister made of the effect that COVID-19 restrictions are likely to have on affordable home building targets?
Thank you, David. Providing people with a safe, warm and secure home remains a key priority for this government. We're making good progress on our commitment to provide 20,000 additional affordable homes. The pandemic has had some impact on house building, but we remain confident that we will meet the ambitious target.
Thank you for that answer, Minister. So we've got 6 months to go, and by my calculations, there's a lot of ground to make up. And I think it's very important that as we're looking at the need for even more social housing, for example, as our experience of how we've dealt with the homelessness crisis and those on the roofless on the streets. And I think that we do need candor so that parties preparing for the next election can look at what would be a reasonable target for the next Welsh Government to set. And I say this in the expectation that you probably won't now be able to meet the 20,000 target. And there are reasons for that. It's not something of great sanction I would apply against you. But we do need candor so that we can plan effectively, because housing at last, right across the UK, and the need for much more house building seems to be climbing up to the top of the agenda.
So actually, I really do think we will meet the 20,000 target. What we won't now do is exceed it, which we were hoping to do before the pandemic. But we are still confident that we will get to the 20,000. Actually, as I say, we had ambitions to go beyond that prior to the pandemic. I'm quite happy to share some of the figures that I have with you, because they're useful planning tools. So we would need to build somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 social homes a year across the whole of the term of the next Welsh Parliament in order to meet the current demand arising from people in emergency or temporary accommodation and what we know of the pipeline of those individuals that might come forward. So that's a planning tool somewhere between 3 and 4. A more ambitious one would, of course, do something more. It would start allowing people who want social housing but who are not currently in that kind of accommodation to access it. And a more ambitious target, again, might allow people who would like to access social housing but have no hope whatsoever of getting to the top of any kind of priority need tree to get it. But the baseline is somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 over the next Assembly term. And I share that with you because I very much hope that all parties in the Assembly will have that ambition, because we need it to make sure that people have the warm, safe, comfortable homes that they richly deserve.
Cwestiwn 4, Llyr Griffith.
Thank you, Llywydd. Will the Minister make a statement on the local government budget in light of COVID-19?
Clear. Budget provision for local government has been increased significantly in 2020-21 to support local authorities to respond to the impacts of COVID-19. I announced the extension of the Local Authority Hardship Fund to £497 million over the recess.
Thank you very much for that response. The assurance has been given with regard to the first quarter. I just want clarity that that will follow in the second quarter of this financial year. But of course, a number of local authorities are planning their budgets for next year, and some of them are considering departmental cuts. So can I ask you if there are any guidance or message that you can give this afternoon to those authorities in planning their budgets to ensure that they won't be cutting a great many of the key services that are currently available at the time when they will be needed most?
Yes, so on the second quarter point, I can absolutely tell you that we will be paying, the hardship fund runs right through the second quarter, and we've made that clear to local authority treasurers, chief executives and leaders in our weekly contact, which is still going on. In terms of the planning assumptions, we have started, we're all way behind on where we should be normally in terms of budget planning. That's no surprise. We've been a bit distracted by the pandemic, obviously. And just keeping services going. And I would just take this opportunity to pay tribute to our local authority partners who have absolutely pulled out the stops and been quite tremendous in both staffing our community hubs, helping with our shielding programme, and now our public sector-based TTP programme. Without, we really could not have done this unless they had stepped up to that plate. And so we wanted to make sure that they didn't have additional money worries while they were doing that, and that they could keep carrying on with essential services. So the homelessness example is a good one there. So we could have put a lot of money into homelessness, but if we'd cut the housing budget or not kept it where it was, then it would have, it would just have been dissipated. But we didn't do that. We've kept the funding up and we've given them the additional funding. So the planning assumptions, we've just started to talk to them about what we're expecting by way of a reasonable worst-case scenario, break-even and so on. And that's tied up, of course, with the UK government's comprehensive spending review, which they're now talking about. And so we hope, and I understand that there's now some discussion with my colleague Rebecca Evans that we'll be able to hold to the normal budget timescale for the Senedd, but it does depend on the comprehensive spending review going ahead as planned and us understanding what comes out of that before we can pass it on to our partners. But we will be working with them in a co-production way to understand what the base assumptions look like and what various types of planning. So if we all plan for a 1% cut, what would that mean for services? If we all plan for break-even and so on, as we do. It is, though, more compressed this year than we would normally expect.
Cwestiwn 7, Evan David.
Will the Minister provide an update on the Welsh Government's response to its call for evidence on estate management charges on housing development?
Yes, thank you, Heaven. We've had all the responses in and we're in the process of preparing a summary of those responses, and I hope to be able to publish it later this autumn.
Can I emphasise the importance of publishing those responses? Throughout lockdown, it's been very difficult for residents in Cwm Calon Estate, Ystrad to get any progress with particularly the estate management company Meadfleet, who've effectively cut off residents. They still take their money, they do a bit of work, but they don't want to engage with residents in any meaningful way. Residents are sick of them, to be honest with you. Redrow own part of the estate. It's very difficult to get work done there, although Redrow are engaging better, and Caerphilly Council are doing the work as much as they can in the light of the restrictions that we are living under. There is no redress. There remains no redress for residents who in freehold to make a complaint on this issue. That remains the case, and we are desperate for action to take place. And I commend you, Minister, in the work that you have done on this and seriously engaging with residents across Wales in similar situations. The sooner we can get the evidence published, the better, and the sooner we can make progress on this, the better. So I really wanted to say, Minister, please keep this on the agenda, and as soon as possible, can we make progress on this issue?
Yes, I'm very well aware of the difficulties in a number of constituencies. Yours is particularly badly hit, I know, and we've had a number of meetings and a site visit at one point, I remember, and a number of other things on this. There are a few things that are also happening. So we'll publish the results of our call for evidence shortly, and then we'll be able to look at what the programme going forward might be. I'm very encouraged by the fact that the Competition and Markets Authority investigation is rolling on, and I just said in response to an earlier question that we're very pleased that it's bringing people to the table that otherwise wouldn't have been brought to the table. So it may be that people are more willing to talk once the investigation proceeds. And also we're currently investigating whether Wales should sign up to the new Homes Ombudsman arrangements, and subject to a piece of work that my officials are doing, we may be able to recommend that we do that, and I'll be, through Rebecca Evans, my colleague, asking the Llywydd to consider whether we can get something onto the floor of the Senedd once we've completed that piece of work. So there are things going on, but I do appreciate the amount of work that it's been for you and your office, and the concerns of your constituents, and we very much hope to be able to do something swiftly once we've got that piece of evidence in place.
Question 8, McAntonev.
Will the Minister make a statement on regulations relating to houses of multiple occupancy, HMOs, in Wales?
Thank you, Mick. Legislation governs the licensing, management, planning and classification of houses of multiple occupation, or HMOs as they're known, and the registration and licensing of landlords and letting agents. The primary legislation relating to HMOs is the 2004 Housing Act, which introduced mandatory and additional licensing, and the 2014 Housing Act, which introduced landlord and agent registration and licensing.
Minister, you'll be aware that I've raised this issue with you on many occasions. We've had many discussions on this, and I know that you share my view that the character and sustainability of communities must not be put at risk by the proliferation of HMOs. Now, Treforest in my constituency is one such community. Local councillors Steve Powderhill and I have opposed many applications, but too often the regulations do not provide any real protection. Recently, we opposed an application for a pub to be converted into an HMO, only to discover that converted existing buildings are not covered by the legislation in the way that new build applications are. I wonder, Minister, if you'd be willing to attend a virtual meeting with myself and local residents and the local councillor to discuss how regulations can be and need to be tightened to better protect communities such as Treforest and others in Wales.
Yes, Mick, I'm more than happy to attend such a meeting. In fact, I've already attended meetings such as that with a number of other authorities who have large concentrations of HMOs. And Llywydd, I am wondering whether to get a group of AMs together across the Senedd who are affected by this. Aberystwyth, I know, has some of the issues. Certainly my constituency in Swansea does, Pontypridd does. There are a number of towns across Wales that have universities in them that have this particular problem. So I'm very happy to attend that meeting, Mick, but I think there may be a reason to get a number of AMs who I know have an interest in this area together so that we can discuss some of the solutions. I could see a lot of nodding around the chamber. Yeah.